Do I have a roll call, please?
Belsley.
Here.
Dobb.
Here.
Hare. Here. Herman.
Here.
Hoffman.
Here.
Newhouse.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have no public hearings tonight, nor do we have any special reports to present. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to make a comment on any of tonight's issues? Katie? Would you state your name and address?
Katie Vandenberg, 2677 Ashley Court, now in Tremont, Illinois. But I do own property here in Morton. My concern tonight is the land swap on the corner of Plum and Adams with Lab Properties. I've spoken to 5 of the 6 of you today. I had quite a busy day and I've learned quite a lot. I've learned that all of you have very differing opinions on what your vision is for downtown. I've learned that some of you are very good listeners and others of you are very good talkers. I've learned that some of you have your opinions and cannot be swayed. I've learned that some of you believe that if you build a parking lot, the developers will come. I've learned that some of you truly believe this is in the best interest of Morton's downtown. And I've learned that few of you see value in green space. I also have, after spending all of these hours today speaking to all of you, along with spending about an hour in Craig Loudermilk's office today, come up with my own opinions. I believe Morton's downtown does have great potential. I would not have spent the last 10 years of my life investing in it, not only in my business, but on various committees and local organizations that seek to better our community. I do not believe the plaza will bring considerable driving traffic. I believe that there's too much private interest in key portions of downtown to be able to accurately forecast the future of Morton's downtown. I believe from my time spent in other rapidly growing cities where I went to college, that green space is important, not only in aesthetics, but in the health of a community, and that it should be given much more consideration. I believe that the track record of the quality of development and maintenance of currently owned properties of the primary private parties that own downtown property should be considered much more heavily before making an investment based on their stated intentions. I believe that you're putting the cart before the horse, putting in parking for developments that haven't been made yet. I believe that if these developments are happening at the rate in which some of you say and intend, then you should put signage on the desolate land between Plum and Main so that Morton knows and understands what is happening and can have some hope for our downtown. Compiling all of my conversations with each of you to whom I've spoken, I'd like to make some recommendations to the board. First, I'd like to ask that you postpone the vote. You all are on very different pages from what I've gathered, and I think that it would be wise to step back and reconsider and maybe talk amongst yourselves a little bit more before you vote. If you do decide to go ahead and do the land swap, I would recommend that you wait to put in parking until developers show interest. Once this new parking lot is in, there's no going back to green space. I think that you should improve the parking lots that we have. I find it very hard to believe that developers will be more likely to come if we have parking, when we already have parking that's only at about 20% usage now and no developers knocking at our doors. That remaining 80% is obviously not attracting them yet, and adding 20 more spaces isn't going to suddenly make them notice downtown Morton. I'd like to recommend that one of you who do believe in green spaces are valuable do some research on the true value of them to share with the rest of the board. You'll see that there is more than intrinsic value to them and that young families seek towns with higher percentages of green space. If you do decide to buy this land or make the swap, however you want to call it, I think that you should spend a little money on making it a viable green space. Talking with some of you, there might be some issues that make it difficult, and I understand that. But I do believe that if you can spend the money to level it enough to create parking that we don't need, you can spend a smaller amount to make it a green space. I really think you need to be more transparent with your village. I only found out about this issue, and I'm pretty involved in Morton because my mother sits on the Business District Commission meeting, and that's where it came up. It's not reasonable to expect all citizens to attend all meetings to stay on top of local politics. As you all may have noticed, social media is a fantastic way to get words out quickly. You should post your agenda on a Facebook page so that all demographics can easily find it and have an opinion. And if this does go through, make sure you have adequate commercial zoning regulations in place so when development does happen, which I think we all hope that it does, We want it to be a proper standard that will actually boost our economy here in Morton. That's all I have. Thank you all for spending time with me today, especially to Craig, who took an hour out of his day to show me the maps and really help me wrap my head around who owns what and what's happened in the past and what the plan is. I think that there's some great things that can happen for our town, but I think we need to slow down and really consider the true value of doing something like this before we pour more concrete down. If you have any questions ever, feel free to call me. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Rose, did you also want to speak?
I'm Rose Hubbard. I live at 317 Lotus in Morton. My concern tonight is also with the land swap at the corner of Plum and Adams, with lab properties. Your downtown looks so sad. And that's what I got from someone in visiting my shop from out of town. And it was very embarrassing to hear that statement. If you mention our downtown to just about anyone who lives here, you hear a lot of ranting and raving about property owners who have caused our downtown to look so sad. And that's the truth. But I'm not sure the individuals are really the ones that we should place the blame on. I believe the blame goes to all the past Board of Trustees. They failed us. They failed those of us who live here today and future generations that will inherit Morton. They failed to put the necessary restrictions and zoning laws in place to protect our downtown. And now improper materials and designs are used in constructing and remodeling the buildings. They failed to value the historical significance of many of the older buildings, and now they're gone. They failed to understand how charming aesthetics can draw visitors to town, which in turn brings revenue. And now everyone travels to Washington to dine and shop. They failed to realize the importance of green space. So who here remembers the mini park on Main Street? Had our past Board of Trustees had some vision, today our mini park could have been a charming little downtown space with native grasses, shade trees, because they'd be big by now, benches for families to enjoy. The very least they could have done was had restrictions in place to ensure that the building that was built on the mini park had a more cohesive design to go with the rest of the building downtown. I do not pretend to know all the ins and outs of this deal. I heard what at the meeting the other day, some of it, and I'm sure I got some of it mixed up. But please keep in mind that we're not talking about just about raising a few buildings. We're talking about the large trees that are on those properties that took 50 to 80 years to grow. And none of us here will ever see trees on that lot that size ever again. Once they're chopped down, they're gone. And if this deal goes through, it goes forward, I do ask that this board at least please place some design restrictions on the proposed development, some serious ones. We need, anyway, historically, especially in the past 20 years, the look of downtown Morton has gone from bad to downright sad. I think it's time for you, this Board of Trustees, to not fail Morton. It's time to put some serious building, design, and historical preservation restrictions in place. The downtown buildings and the lots may belong and be owned by certain individuals, but they shouldn't have run of the place. I feel like because downtown Morton belongs to all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. Would anyone else like to speak? There being no one, would anyone in the audience like to pull anything from the consent agenda? What we have tonight is minutes and some bills to pay. Would any of the trustees like to pull anything from the consent agenda? There being no one, could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Seconded by Mr. Newhouse. Any discussion? Call a vote, please.
Belsley?
Yes.
Dobb?
Yes.
Hare?
Yes.
Herman?
Yes.
Kaufman?
Yes.
Newhouse?
Yes. I have nothing tonight. How about the village clerk?
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Village administrator, and before she speaks, everyone should notice that this is her first time with us. Julie is, as you may remember, our new administrator, treasurer, controller, and anything else we can think of to give her.
That's for sure. Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to ask for approval for a transfer of $50,000 from the general fund and $5,000 from the Waters and Sewer Depreciation Fund to the Capital Projects Fund.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Ginger. Any discussion or questions? Call a vote, please.
Dobb?
Yes.
Hare?
Yes.
Herman?
Yes.
Kaufman?
Yes.
Newhouse?
Yes.
Belsley?
Yes.
Anything else?
That's it.
Chief of Police,
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Corporate Counsel,
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Director of Fire and Emergency Services,
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Director of Public Works,
2 items tonight, Your Honor. First one, a Public Works recap of the month of January is in your packets. And the next item, I'd like to ask for acceptance of bid for 2015 gas pipe from Grebner out of West Chicago, Illinois, in the amount of $26,677.60.
so moved.
Second.
Leslie moved. Kaufman seconded. Any discussion? Call a question, please.
Hare?
Yes.
Herman?
Yes.
Kaufman?
Yes.
Newhouse?
Yes.
Belsley?
Yes.
Dobb?
Yes.
Anything else, Mr. Laudermilk?
That's all I have tonight, Your Honor.
Thank you. Planning and Zoning,
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Trustee Belsley,
Nothing this evening.
Trustee Dobb,
Nothing tonight.
Trustee Hare.
Two real quick things. One, had a chance to talk to our new administrator today. I'd like to, she does not have a village phone. We need to get a village phone into her hands, just with the communication of texting and emails and all of those things. It would be wise for us to do that. So I wanted to let that one maybe fall through the cracks a little bit, but no big deal, no harm, no foul. Get her phone so she can communicate with us all via text and email mobily. Then the second thing, I had a chance last Friday to go out to the wastewater treatment facility, spend quite a bit of time. It was nice and warm that day, hopping between buildings on Friday, if you can remember. But it's just it's something that we don't think about very often, and I know a lot of the people in the community don't necessarily appreciate what actually happens out there, and how much or how lucky we should be with the people that are running that facility out there and the village employees. And I got to tell you, it was a very impressive time, well spent out there, and they do a lot of community education to find out what's going on. So I really appreciate those guys and what they do for us, because we have some projects in the near future with the EPA that are coming that we are going to need to get into and check some stuff out. So just wanted to put that out there, and appreciate Craig and Phil and the fellows out there. So
Thank you. Trustee Herman.
Thank you, Your Honor. I noticed that Mrs. Piles provided the tourism office update for us this evening, and there's a lot of interesting information on there with January update. I'd like to point out that from May 2014 to February 2015, she has logged 1,697 volunteer hours of our volunteers have been manning the office and doing other things to assist her. So if anyone has any questions, she can be contacted, or if you have questions tonight. But that's the current tourism update. And that's all I have. Your
Thank
Honor.
you.
Thank you.
Trustee Kaufman.
Just a couple items tonight, Your Honor. First, I'd like to talk about the area disposal service contract, a possible extension of it for 5 more years. Mr. Newhouse discussed it at the last meeting I missed. Trustee Newhouse, our Public Works Director, Craig Laudermilk, and myself been working on how to get another hazardous waste quickly for the community this year. So we were so over budget on it last year. We could not, in all honesty, ask Grimm to do it now. It was supposed to be about another 4 years, I think, into the contract. So we would probably have to come out with money out of the general fund and subsidize it. So thinking we didn't want to do things like that, we thought we'd extend the contract. They've done a good job, and by doing so, we get not only this year's hazardous waste, but we have 2 more built in, one in 2018 and one in 2021. So what we're proposing is asking for an extension of this agreement for 5 more years that would go through the year 2024, and it would go from the top rate at the end of the 24 would be $18.50 a month, but the smaller totes would be $15.50. So if you're 65 years or older, just like now, you can get the smaller totes. It locks in the rate for the last 4 years, so this isn't some agreement where it's a percentage increase every year. It's not that. But built into that is that they are taking the cost for all 3 hazardous waste, which I don't know of another community that has that locked in. We'll extend the contract to 2/24, and it would still have 3 one-year extensions after that. So the board at that time could renegotiate or extend it for 3 more one-year agreements. So we have it planned now that if this passes, we would have a hazardous waste pickup June 13th on a Saturday at the brand-new bus garage of the school property next to the firehouse in Cortland from 7:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. But I'd like to remind the citizens that cardboard, electronics, and motor oil can be dropped off every day that Grimm's are open. The next hazardous waste, we don't need 5 huge containers of electronics. That slows the process down, those big TVs. So that stuff can be dumped at that site every day of the week. So I would turn it over to Mr. Newhouse to have anything you would like to add to that.
Not very much. We're all affected by what's going on globally in the waste world. It has to do with the cost of recycling and hazardous household hazardous waste handling, and I think this is a good deal for Morton citizens. It locks in a price, it assures the services, and it seems to me to be a very, very favorable arrangement.
You've made a motion. Do I have a second?
I would make a motion. Yes.
Second. Any discussion or questions? Call a question.
Herman.
Yes.
Kaufman.
Yes.
Newhouse.
Yes.
Belsley.
Yes.
Dobb.
Yes.
Pear.
Yes.
I would like to point out that Royal Coulter is in the audience. Could you raise your hand, Royal? Royal is the owner of PDC, and I've done business with him for about 30 years, I think, and always been very happy. So I think this will be a nice arrangement for the city.
Thank you, Ron. We appreciate being here in your community. Very nice community. And also, Mark Grimm does a very good job for us, so I just want to state that.
And I'll repeat myself, yes, he does.
And yes, we're going to put, Jeff, we're going to put that fence around.
Right. They have agreed in the agreement that they're going to put a couple of gates up and fence, so dumping is controlled, the site's controlled, and they've agreed to that, so.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The other item I have, Your Honor, is I come up with an idea and approached Lab Properties, Mr. Sam Parrott, on the property of 136 Plum Street. The last remaining older home on that block. The village acquired the other 2 pieces. Mr. Parrott has knocked those down. And I've looked at that, and I've talked to other trustees in the past about lining Plum Street. And after I looked at it, I didn't want to really buy the entire house and spend that kind of money, so I came up with a drawing that each of you have where the village would purchase 10 feet along Plum Street, the back end of the 2 properties of 136, 134, and 132, which both pieces Mr. Parrott owns, and then approximately 6 feet on the 10 feet along the other side. And what this did would be able to align the street, add additional parking. We'd also get rid of the entrance to Mr. Parrott's lot off of Adams Street. So what I was trying to do, after Mr. Laudermilk has pounded in my head for about a year and a half how parking lots work, one way in, one way out, I was trying to avoid entrances close to that entrance, so when you're pulling in, you don't have one parking spot, and a visitor to Morton wouldn't maybe see cars going in and out. So I thought there was some gain there. So I approached him and offered to see if he would be interested in selling that ground for $40,000, and he would do all the demos of the house. And as we were talking, I'll give the exact words. I told him, I can tell you why you're going to do this deal. And Sam goes, and why is that, Jeff? I says, now you can get rid of a rundown house that you're not spending money on, and you can add it to your other duplex and make a incubator-type building downtown Morton with affordable rent. He seemed to like that idea, so in that discussion, he agreed to tear the house down. Mr. Laudermilk has given me a cost of approximately $20,000 to tear it down. I've talked to an excavator here in Morton. They said it could be as much as $30,000. That is included in the deal for the $40,000. So what that ground where the house is still his. We're just buying in the drawings the back end, which can be added to the parking lot that we're hopefully designing for that area. So I think I pretty well covered the highlights of it. So I'll be glad to answer any questions. It was, so I would make a motion that, well, let's just,
Well, let's have a motion in a second.
motion
Get it on the
discussion?
table.
Okay, well, then I'll make a motion that we would approve the written agreement, added that we would include the replatting of both properties. I told Mr. Parrott if he tore it down, we would do the replatting. It gets kind of confusing when you get two different outfits doing that.
Did I hear a second?
I'll second that for the
Sam Harris
discussion.
seconded.
Sam Harris seconded.
Now, any discussion? You wanted to say something?
Well, I'm a little troubled by some of the discussion that I've heard tonight, earlier commentary. When this was first proposed, I didn't see very many downsides to it. And I recognize that, through other eyes, this perhaps doesn't look as attractive maybe as I thought it was. Morton has traditionally had the most restrictive zoning ordinances in the area, in central Illinois. It's only been in the last few years that we've begun to modify some of those to kind of enhance opportunity, and we're still very restrictive in terms of zoning and use of materials. So I worry a little bit when I think that folks maybe think there hasn't been sufficient control, or that the village has certain authority over private enterprise that no municipality, no government has or ought to have in this country. And at the same time, I recognize that there are some legitimate concerns about this site. I went back and looked at if y'all remember the downtown development plan that we presented several years ago. I went back and looked through the plan, and I've got to say, as I look at the plan, we talk about the increase in use of open public space. The plan talked about the need for parking. Certainly there's been a recognition of need for parking in relation to the plaza. And we talked about some of the kind of construction that we hoped to see. Not necessarily exactly like this, but things we talked about, in fact, got some criticism for because we're trying to force an image on the community. But it seems to me that much of what's going on downtown right now, it acts to enable what we expect to be the kind of construction and development we will get out of this plan, and certainly in conjunction with the plaza. So right now, I'm kind of two minds, but I certainly don't feel that the most of the demolition downtown has been private enterprise demolition. And there are a limited number of investors in downtown. That's always been the case in Morton. We've always had 3 or 4 people that have put their money in downtown, and if they're not there, then we don't have any money invested in downtown. So I guess at this point, I'm kind of willing to listen to what everybody else has to say, and kind of holding my judgment at this point, but I think there's an argument to be made in favor of what's been proposed, as well as an argument against.
Does anyone else have a thought? Randy?
I have a couple of questions, a couple of comments. I guess initially the thing that struck me and my question is as I look back on just in recent several months this past year, actually, if we go back over the last couple of months, couple of years, excuse me, we've been working with Sam and Lab Properties for quite a while on the downtown space and the property he owns and the property that the village owns. And actually, one of those agreements came to be just in November of this year, where we swapped property, and at that time, there's a lot of discussion and vetting out of the condition of the properties and the housing stock. And we were specifically informed, I guess at that time, the two properties, one of which was 136 Adams Street, which is right at the corner of Plum and Adams, was not available, not for sale, not for consideration, because it was of good quality, it was a viable property, he is receiving rent income from it, and so it was out of discussion, it was removed. And that was understood by all, and that was fine, that was part of our discussion, and we moved forward with it. We entered into the agreement actually November 17th, and so here we are 3 months later, and I'm trying to understand what happened in that 3 months that now we've deemed that house at the corner of Plum and Adams as, according to a memo from our attorney, that it's an unsightly house, and we've heard tonight it's, you know, a dilapidated, worn-out house and it needs to go. And I'm struggling with trying to understand what happened in 3 months that we were recharacterizing that property there. I quite honestly, I totally disagree with characterizing it as unsightly. I mean, I've driven by it, I've taken pictures of it, I've walked that area. It never struck me as unsightly. It's maybe a little worn out, but there's a lot of properties in town and other areas that's a little worn out that with some tender loving care and some attention, it can be a viable property for many years to come. So I guess that's my initial struggle with this is how the turn of events happened in such a short time with what brought us to today to now determining that we need the more parking, and what is going to result, one of the things that's going to result from that is that this property has to come down, and I really struggle with that. So I guess I'm looking for an explanation of helping me understand that, I guess, in that short a time, the turn of events, what happened here. Because the property was not available back in November, I guess, when we closed on this deal, because it was a good, viable property.
Just a second, Craig,
Well, I'll
you
just,
want to
let
respond,
me
and
answer
then I'll
shortly.
talk to
I
Craig.
tried to line up the street, and that older piece of property is 10 feet and hits the house. When I approached Mr. Parrott, he thought he could tear it down and attach a new building to the one he has. And since we're tearing out the curb and some of it to realign and make it handicap accessible and different things with the parking lot, we will save money if we can use a curb machine. So I thought we have one shot to line up the street and put parking in front of the houses across the street, which they do not have parking. Mr. Walker.
Let me do the trustees first. Trustee Don.
Yeah, my comment about it is that I think the most important aspect of this is the realignment of Plum Street from the sightline standpoint at that intersection. When I still worked at the old police station, which was right at that intersection, there was a lot of close calls and several accidents at that intersection. So I think the purchase of that property is important for the safety of that intersection and the sight lines. And when we come down to designing a parking lot, we can decide then what we're going to put in the green space and what's going to be part of the parking lot to make it look aesthetically pleasing to the public. But I think the important thing for safety is to first buy the property.
Craig, were you?
I just wanted to clarify, Randy had a great question, but I mean, Sam and I have worked on the previous deal for a long time, so, but the intent of that original deal, from my perspective, was we were gonna trade square foot for square foot. And I only say that because we worked really hard to get the properties, it was a unique deal, so that there was no money exchange. That was why the amount of property that we had was equal for equal. And I think, I just want to add that we worked on that a long time. And I will also add, we're still trying to close on this deal. There are a lot of details. It was a complex agreement because we worked on square foot for square foot. And we took slivers, towards the old Wanless building there to make sure that it was 23,000 square feet for each, so that it was equal for equal. So the intent of the agreement a year ago and throughout was that there would be no exchange of cash with it. I just want to add that, not speaking on for or against, but we've worked on this for a long time and are still attempting to close on the previous agreement.
Trustee Hare, did you have something you wanted to add?
How many, Craig, you did a little bit of an analysis on how many parking spaces was that going to, you sent us a.
If this deal goes through, now, I spent a lot of time with Katie today, and I understand her concerns with the parking lot and all that. I only say this in terms of if this deal goes through and we were to put a parking lot, which has not been thoroughly vetted yet through the board, that it would increase parking to 40 spaces. That would be 12 spaces of on-street on Plum if we wanted to, 2 along Adams from eliminating the entrance, and 28 on the site. That was if you do a parking lot with detention on the entire site. So I'm not speaking for the parking lot or anything, that's how much this deal could add in terms of parking spaces.
And that the parking space doesn't have to be done right away. But I guess my thought process is, you know, and the couple of the comments of, you know, building the space, parking spaces will attract development. There can be an argument made for and against that. But I do know this for a fact. If we don't take opportunities like this to try to gain parking spaces, you can't go back and create parking spaces once development has happened. It becomes incredibly difficult to do that. So if we look at a relatively low investment at this point to create parking spaces to enable developers of a diverse business element, meaning it could be retail, it could be restaurants, it could be, you know, townhomes, it could, you know, the development then has a lot of different options, where if we don't create parking space, you're going to have very limited development options there and very specific needs, whether that's Sam or someone else. And that part to me is actually concerning because of the history of the development of the downtown. We need this to move forward. This is another piece of the puzzle. It's not the only thing. It's just like the plaza. The plaza itself is not the downtown development. It's a catalyst for downtown development. These are things that, for me, that it just makes a lot of sense, especially trying to project 25 to 50 years down the road. You know, so for me, I think we would be kicking ourselves if we didn't take advantage of this opportunity to create this, so that we're maximizing the different potential for development down the road, and very quickly for that development down the road.
Thank you. Trustee Herman, did you have some comments you'd like to make?
Thank you. I too had some of the same questions that Mr. Belsley had. I actually went back and printed the property exchange information, and so that was a question that I had too, is why at that time was this not considered? And so Craig, I appreciate your comment in that regard, because it would appear that at that time it was, you know, not even really up for discussion. It was still to belong to Mr. Parrott. I also went back and read the Halcyon Levine study, and I'm not convinced that we need a lot more parking. I think that I view the plaza as more of an amenity for our citizens, and I feel that it would be walked to or biked to, and then used for special events, certain special events, large, or you know, maybe a handful of times a year that we would have massive parking needs. And I am a green space person. I feel like not everyone needs to be able to park by the front door of their destination. It's okay to walk a block or two. And I think Eli's is a prime example of that. There's a lot of people there, and the parking, they just make it work because, you know, if it's a destination that you want to go to, you find a place to park, and it doesn't have to be right there. So I'm unconvinced that we need this much more parking at this time. I was concerned about the rationale for aligning the intersection. I know that it's not a perfect right angle, but it's been that way for a long, long time. I was unaware of the accident, if there really have been a lot of accidents there, or the sight line. I'm not sure how that could be improved. I'm not sure it's the best use of village money to align that intersection. I also discovered in the House Hill Levine plan that under the goal of creating a distinctive sense of place for our downtown, one of the objectives was to encourage the adaptive reuse of historic and architecturally significant commercial as residential buildings in the downtown area to maintain the authenticity of the area. And I think if we just really are focusing on parking lots, we miss sometimes some opportunities for some of those historic buildings to be repurposed and kept on the tax rolls. So on the surface, it all sounded good when it was first presented to me. But after the very thoughtful emails that I received from the two citizens who spoke tonight, I see that I'm just not sure that I'm comfortable with, if the deal goes through, I kind of would like to rethink the idea of parking. That's just my personal opinion. We have an entrepreneur and an artist telling us tonight that they see potential for buildings like that, and I think it should give us pause to think about what we're doing to the downtown. I think there's a lot of frustration out there when our citizens hear us talking about trading and swapping and this and that, but they're not seeing a lot of tangible, attractive improvements. And I don't really consider a parking lot a tangible, attractive improvement. So I think there's certainly, I'd maybe like to postpone this or discuss it further as to our exact plans for that spot, or if there is any chance that that building could be repurposed. I'm not sure there's any rush to accomplish this tonight, and I think there just may be some options out there, or at least this has certainly generated some good conversations about our plans for downtown. And I think we need to keep in mind the historic preservation aspects of some of these areas, and then just factor that into our decisions.
Trustee Kaufman, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Just a simple note, the $40,000 that Mr. Parrott agreed to is buying the dirt only, and it buys almost 60% of the dirt. The two buildings he paid $215,000 for. So he must see merit in it. How many people sell 60% of the dirt that you paid $215,000 for $40,000? I think it's time to align the street, clean the corner up, and whether it's green space or parking, it'll complement that area, because I believe the parking lot that Mr. Craig Laudermilk is thinking of is going to be fairly flat for events. So it's not only going to be a parking lot, it's going to be an event, because it being flat, you can have tents and that on it. So, you're going to have space, whether it be green, flat, for events downtown. So I think there's a lot of merit in doing it.
Just one other observation, Your Honor. When we need to be careful when we talk about historic preservation and green space. First off, the historic value is frequently in the eye of the beholder, like beauty. And we don't get to make that decision. It's private property. And in the places where that has been done around the country that I'm aware of, there's usually been some kind of a public-private enterprise in order to accomplish it. The money has to come from someplace. Otherwise, the village winds up in the position of imposing decisions on the private citizens, and that's something that in the village of Morton has not been very attractive, as we've been down this road before when we talked about some of the downtown development work. I like historic buildings, but I think we in green spaces in the same way. The village has not typically maintained a lot of green space, and even the plaza was, as we all know, was pretty controversial with respect to the use of village investment. So those things are important and they sound good, but we need to be careful. There's no municipal authority to say, well, that's a historic preservation building and we're going to keep this one and we're going to let that one go down and that's going to be green space. So the only way that's going to happen is if there's some kind of coordination with private enterprise, and those private holders, whether they're homeowners or business owners, are willing to step up and say, yes, I'll do that and I'll put my money in it and risk whatever the consequence is of its use. So I think that question needs to be separate from the question of what decision we make on this acquisition and adjustment of setbacks.
Just real quick, a note is, I just counted, there's 22 people in the room. Did anybody drive together? We have 22 cars in the parking lot. If we got to be wary of that. We're not going to create a downtown that is a complete, we want it to be walking. We want bikes and we want people to be in there, but we also have to be wary if we're going to be attracting businesses that increase that. The number of parking spots that are available become a premium, just like what we're seeing out here tonight, of the number of cars and vehicles that are available. So it is part of the planning function of this board is to prep that area to make sure that it's safe and to make sure that it's a great place for development. I just wanted to point that out as far as the number of cars here.
Yeah, appreciate the comments that have been shared tonight, and I think obviously from what Katie observed earlier that there's some diverse opinion among the board as to the direction for the downtown in some of these areas. I would concur with those that didn't feel the need for parking. I'm not convinced that there is, and I understand parking is a premium in urban areas like that, but I think for us to design and accommodate for the parking needs on a handful of occasions for the year is bad planning and a poor use of resources. Besides the Pumpkin Festival, we have a number of tourism events that bring people downtown, and certainly that parking lot would fill up. But I think to use that as a guideline for how we can justify the need for additional parking, I think is sort of a hollow argument. So I just don't see the need for it in terms of Plum Street needing to be widened to, again, gain more parking. I've driven that now a couple times in the past couple weeks to look at it, and just from an observation standpoint, it's holding up pretty well. I hate to see us tear out and have to widen that again for the sake of just, again, getting some more parking that I feel is suspect, and then in the meantime it would fulfill the means of taking down a house on the corner to widen that street. So I understand the comments and the perspective shared from an engineering perspective, I guess, and from a public works perspective, I guess. I would hate to see this decision based solely on that vantage point alone, and we can't lose sight of the historic value and the community development perspective that also needs to be taken into account with this decision. So I would be very much in favor of extending this and tabling the discussion to the next meeting at least, and giving some more time for evaluation and review of what's been shared tonight, and see if we can't come up with a good solution to bring that back. And with that, I guess I'll make a motion to table this item.
Second.
As chairman, it would seem sometimes that my only job is to lead the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. But I have one other job too, and that's to make sure that both sides get a fair hearing. I've listened carefully to what Trustee Kaufman says, and you can't refute any of it. It all makes sense. It's all a smart thing to do. And yet, two of our entrepreneurs come in here. These are two people who have actually started businesses downtown. While we plan and talk about it, they actually did it. And they said, wait a minute, slow down a minute. So I don't see that there's any real conflict here other than that maybe we're moving a little bit fast. And so maybe Trustee Belsley's approach would be good to just delay this to the next meeting so everybody gets a chance to get kind of used to what we're going to do here. So having said that, call the question for the...
We have two questions.
Yeah. Questions presented. The first question presented was to approve, right? So in order of procedure, unless, in my opinion, unless the movant or the person who made the second desires to withdraw that motion, it'd be procedurally in order to call that first.
All right, so it's up to Trustee Kaufman to determine whether or not he's willing to delay.
I'd rather not delay. I think the purchase is more than reasonable. What we do with it, it's going to take 4 votes to decide if it's green space or parking. But I think Mr. Dobb and work down there, and it's a safety issue, and I think it's time to line it when it's the cheapest time to do it, when we're revamping the curbs and making it correct. It's a one-time shot.
By way of procedure, not to tell anybody how to vote the question, but there's nothing that prevents the matter from being recalled. So since the movement has indicated no desire to withdraw his motion, procedurally be in order to call that question. If you voted it down tonight, it could be presented at a future meeting. But
call the question.
I am calling the question.
This is the question of
on
whether
the
or not to
resolution
approve the
to
resolution.
approve. Okay. Kaufman.
Yes.
Newhouse.
Yes.
Belsley.
No.
Dobb.
Yes.
Hare. Yes.
Herman.
No.
The motion passes.
4-2.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you. Trustee Newhouse.
One item this evening, Your Honor, which I hope maybe will go some way towards making folks feel better about the decision we just made. You have in your packets the long debated and analyzed mixed-use zoning for downtown. And you may recall at the last meeting, when I talked about this, I said we were giving it one last look. There's always the issue of unintended consequences, and guess what? We found some. So Mr. Spangler very adroitly noted a couple of conflicts related to building materials and suggested a change on that, which basically takes the mixed-use ordinance, makes it consistent with the existing building materials requirement, and eliminates the water retention question, which is moot for this purpose. So with that, the ordinance, the proposition that you have in front of you is for mixed use that would cover the geographical area. That's this map on camera, and make it permissible in that area for the kind of mixed residential and commercial use that 20 years ago we absolutely opposed and prohibited in Morton, and over the years become convinced that this has merit and will help facilitate, we hope, the kind of investment that we want to see downtown, where we have walkable access, mix of residential and business use. And just again, for folks' reference, we need to keep in mind that we talk about residential downtown, a lot of houses downtown, none of them are in residentially zoned. Almost all of them are in B zoning, and zoning rules prevail. So this actually creates a mixed use which better legitimatizes the mix between residential use and commercial use. One other issue has resulted from this, and that is my guidance from the village attorney, Mr. Davies, that in order to make this work, we'd have to rezone each individual piece of property. Well, not practical for the village to go do surveys and to measure all the pieces of property and arbitrarily rezone them. So the solution that we came upon, and we'll need guidance from village attorney tonight from Mr. McGrath, is simply to make an amendment to this document that says that any property owner within the mixed-use area may take advantage of this zoning. And then I think there's a question of how that would be accomplished, whether it go before the plan commission or come directly before this board or simply apply for it. And I guess that's where we need some guidance. Mr. Counsel?
Well, I think you could do it, a couple different ways. You could do it as a special use, to where mixed use, mixed residential and commercial was a special use for which an application would have to be made and it'd follow the normal special use approval process.
Right, we talked about that.
Or you could define mixed use as a type of use and have that as a permissive use, or permitted use, in your existing districts. Each would require a fair bit of revision to the proposed ordinance in terms of wording and how it interjects or inserts itself into your code. I would suggest it may be appropriate to table action on this because
that will be my next question.
It's more than if it was adding a few lines, a few things we could do by pen stroke. I'd work with you through it tonight. But since I think either direction would require a fair bit of redrafting, it would maybe in order to table this.
We don't want to create a situation where it's more complicated for somebody to use it than is necessary. So with that advice, then what I would suggest is rather than a motion tonight, I will hold this for the next meeting. In the meantime, we will get either Mr. McGrath or Mr. Davies to make the appropriate revision, and then it will be ready for passage, I hope, and we will have covered all of the gremlins that have arisen.
Do we need a motion to table?
Yes, I'd suggest it be.
Motion to table?
Motion to table.
Second.
Second by Jeff. Any questions?
Just one question. I think this is a typo on the number 5. Is that supposed to be offices for governmental agencies? On the first page.
I'm looking at the old draft.
Yeah,
Just
okay.
a second.
I think it's just a typo, but it doesn't make sense.
Well, it's got to be reviewed anyway.
Okay, so
we
just
will,
check
we
that.
Will
you check that when you
look at that?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Call the question.
Belsley.
Yes.
Dobb.
Yes.
Hare.
Yes.
Herman.
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
Newhouse.
Yes.
Is that all, Trustee Newhouse? Do you have anything else?
That is all, yes, sir.
Could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Second by Mayor. All in favor, you better call it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.